One, if you will, open your Bibles up to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. It's Tuesday, still Tuesday, in the last week of Jesus' life. What are some of the things that have taken place on Tuesday? All right, that actually happened probably on Monday, but that's okay because what happens on Tuesday is related to that. That's right. They question him about what authority do you have doing this? And so that leads to all the questions that come up. And so Jesus deals with these test questions that they're trying to entangle him and trap him in one by one. And then he begins to levy some accusations against them. Series of 8 woes. Who was this directed towards? Scribes and the Pharisees. That's right. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees. And what did he call them? Hypocrites. So he goes through and he talks about these different things that they are doing, how they love the praise of men, how they love to convert people to Judaism, but then they by their false teaching make them worse than themselves even. And now we're down to the last woe in verse 29, where he says, "Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have partaken with them in the blood of the prophets." In other words, we wouldn't have done the things that they did. So they accepted the scripture. They accepted all of that. They accepted that Jeremiah was a prophet and acknowledged that Jeremiah was mistreated by the Jews. So they recognize all of that. But what's the problem? Yes. So they can look back in history and say, oh, yeah, that wasn't right. That was right. But then they're doing exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And so Jesus makes that point. Verse 31, therefore you are witnesses against yourself that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. In other words, you're still like them. So verse 32, fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Fill up the measure. So can you imagine, here's a cup, and throughout the years, every time that they rejected God and persecuted his messengers, a little bit more wrath was poured into the cup. And through all of those centuries, it's been building up, and now there's just a little bit left, and what Jesus says is just go ahead and top it off. That's what you're doing. Just top it off. What would be we've already seen some parables that dealt with this. What would be the finishing off of the cup of God's wrath here? Yes, you remember that's the parable of the vine dressers. He would send servants, they would mistreat them and abuse them and stone some of them, and finally he said, well, I'll send my son, they'll respect my son, and they kill his son. And the master said, well, that did it. That did it. And that's exactly what's taking place here. So Jesus is looking at that and he's saying, all throughout the years, the Jews have been rejecting God's prophets, and now you're going to finish it off by rejecting his son. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. And then what does he call them in verse 33? Yes. It's one thing, just to call somebody a dirty dog or whatever. But what's the significance of calling someone a brood of vipers in biblical language? Yes. That serpent of old, Satan, the devil, and you are his offspring. You are his seed. And that reminds me of a prophecy. Do you remember a prophecy in Genesis 3? The seed of woman of whose seed? That's right. So the seed of woman, the descendant of woman, will enter into a conflict with the descendants of Satan, and in that conflict, his heel will be bruised, and he will bruise Satan's head. So when Jesus is saying, and when John said the same thing, you're a brood of vipers, there was an allusion there to the fact that you are that seed of Satan. You are that offspring of Satan. And that's exactly what they're doing, is entering a conflict with the seed of woman in that. Any thoughts, comments up to verse 33? Yeah, very good.
Exactly what they're taking on that same persona, same.
Yes. Very good. And so what does he say the result will be in verse 3? 33, I'm sorry. Yes, condemnation of hell. That's what you're headed for because of this. So verse 34, therefore indeed I sent you prophets, wise men, and scribes, and some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute in city to city. And so he's looking forward now, and he says, this is you've understood the past, you've understood the history, the family history. You're doing the same thing and will continue to do the same thing. So now Jesus is looking for not only what he's going to do to them, what they're going to do to him, excuse me, I can't get my words to come out today, what they're going to do to him, but also what they're going to do to his disciples. And so you know the story already, so you can kind of fast forward in your mind and think, what's going to happen to Stephen? What's going to happen later to Paul? What's going to happen to all of those Christians that we're going to see driven from city to city, persecuted by the Jews, hated by the Jews, and so forth? So, verse 35, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel. How was Abel's blood spilled? He offered a sacrifice that was pleasing to God. His brother did not. His brother became envious, and so what did he do? He killed him because Abel offered a righteous sacrifice. That was the first example. Terry O'Malley, he always said, isn't it striking that the first person to die died for doing right and was killed by his brother? And that's a sad commentary on human history, isn't it? And then we fast forward and we go all the way through the scripture, and we get to the end of the Old Testament. We've got Zechariah, and Zechariah apparently died in the temple for doing what was right. And so basically what Jesus is saying is, you take the whole scripture, and from beginning to end, what you have people persecuting other people for doing what's right. Now, let it just be on this generation that all the righteous blood that's been shed, it's filled up. The cup is now full, and the cup of wrath is going to be poured out on this generation. Verse 36, assuredly I say, all these things will come upon this generation. Thoughts or comments before we look into that a little bit more?
It's, the verses that talk about they're not going to be punished for what their fathers did. And I think that still holds true. They're not getting punished because what their fathers did, their ancestors did. But they're doing the same thing.
Yes.
So they're going to be punished.
And they are exhausting God's patience.
Yes, that's what.
They're exhausting God's patience. So I think that parable that Rita brought up a second ago about the parable of the vine dresser is very fitting. You send a servant, they reject the servant. You send another servant, they beat that one. You send another one, they kill that one. And so finally you say, well, I'll send my son. Send his son, kill the son. I'm out of patience. What else can I do? And that's what's happening with Israel. It's taken generations to get to this point, but on this generation, God is sending his son and they're rejecting his son. And so the consequences will be dire. Got anything?
You may finish the chapter.
Yeah, if you want to. Go ahead.
In verse 37 through the rest of the chapter, what we see here is Jesus has a completely different tone now. It's a dramatic tone change. And so he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Isn't this amazing? In spite of all of their wickedness, he still loves them. He doesn't want them to be lost. He wants them to be saved. He doesn't want Jerusalem to be destroyed. And if they would change, they could be saved. But anyway, he had called them to repent and come to him, but they would just refused and would not do it. And so we see Jesus's heart here. He loves them. He still loves them. But he says the end of them is to be destroyed because of the way they are.
In the contrast of the two images here, the one as a hen gathers her chicks, and I've got this image up here, but here's to protect. That's what's going on. Come under my wings of shelter here for protection and warmth and care. That's what I want. That's what I came to do. But you wouldn't have it. You would not accept that. And so what happens to little chicks when they won't stay under their mom's protection? Melissa knows. Those of you who have chickens know. Destruction comes upon them. And so Jesus is talking about, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, this is what I wanted for you. But this is what's going to happen because you wouldn't have that. And he can see the misery that's going to come upon them, the destruction that the Romans will bring. That would be a consequence of them saying, we don't want what God is trying to give us. And God says, okay, well, I'll leave you to yourself then. And destruction comes upon them.
I think that you think they don't think it can happen to them, even though they should have known from their history that this ain't, God had been telling them back before the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple and all that, the same kind of thing.
Yes.
He was warning them and saying, I want to protect you. You're not listening to me. Same thing.
So before we go any further, now we're going to pick back up. There's one other detail, and since we're trying to put this in chronological order, we're going to fit it in here, and it's a little bit of a disruption of the flow of thought, so we want to come back to it. But before we do that, before we make that, take that distraction there, I want to ask you, what do you think the lesson that we could gain from this would be for us today? Because obviously we're not Jerusalem. We don't have, the destruction is not coming upon us as Jesus sees it coming upon Jerusalem that we know of. But what do you think the application is? What do we need to learn from this? Yeah.
Seek out wise leaders that will lead you in the right way.
Very good. Don't reject the call. So how does the Lord call us to come under the shelter of his wings? The gospel. All of his instruction. And you think about, we were memorizing Ephesians 6:1 with the children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, that you may live long upon the earth. That was a call to listen to what I say. Listen to your parents. And in that you will find the protection that you may live long upon this earth. And so that's just one example, but every one of God's commandments is like that, is calling us to take shelter. And any time that we say, I don't think I want to do that one. I don't think I'm interested in that. I don't like God's direction on that. I want to go this way. Then what we're doing is we're leaving the shelter of the Lord. And the same result happens. I mean, that is the pattern in the Bible, is come and I will be your God and you will be my people. No, I don't want to be your people. Okay, well then I won't be your God. And you know what happens when we don't have God. And so I think that is the lesson for us. What we see here is still very applicable to us today. Anything else in this chapter? All right, let's take a little detour and go over to Mark chapter 12. And the reason I want to go over there is because Mark gives us a detail here in a little bit more better description. In Mark chapter 12 and verse 41, as Jesus is in the temple, leaving the discussion with the scribes and the Pharisees, he is there near the treasury. And it said he sat opposite the treasury, and he saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in a lot. But one poor widow came who threw in 2 mites, which makes a quadrant. I found different descriptions about, if you're reading from the Old King James, I think it says two pennies. Is that right? So if you're thinking of 2 1-cent coins, that's not exactly accurate. Leon makes this point. Leon Malden makes this point, and I think it is relevant and helpful. If you had 2 pennies, what could you buy with 2 pennies? Yeah, that's right. That's right. I don't know if you can buy a piece of gum anymore. I don't even think they have the 1-cent, gumball machines anymore. And so basically that's totally useless to you. So if you throw that in the collection, what is that? What sacrifice is that? You didn't really have anything to begin with, But now if you had a few dollars, like $5, and that's all you had, literally all you had, could you buy anything with that? You could go buy a can of beans or something. You could get a meal out of it probably. And this would be more equivalent to something like that. It's not much. It's very little in comparison, but it's something that would still be a value. Where if you're really thinking of 2 cents, it's like, well, that wouldn't even be really a value. This would still be a value. And it's all she has. And she comes and she puts in 2 mites. By the way, here are the Roman coins that are under consideration here. There's a number of those still in existence today. Matter of fact, Phil Harden gave me one that I think in the times past I've set it up here so that y'all could look at it or whatever, but I didn't bring it today. So he calls his disciples to him. So Jesus sees this and he calls his disciples. And this is one of those stories where you get an insight into what Jesus notices, what he pays attention to, and what's important to him. And we've talked about it. As we go through and look at the life of Christ, we want to see what's important to Jesus, because that's what needs to be important to us. And so he called his disciples to him and he said, "Assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all of those who have given to the treasury." Well, that must have been confusing, because I'm pretty sure that these fellows over here that have a lot of money and a lot of gold hanging around their neck and everything came up. And by the way, we've already seen how are some of the scribes and the Pharisees giving their contributions. That's right. Hey, look how much, cha-ching, 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 wanting everybody to see how much it's putting in. And then here somebody comes that I doubt anybody else there probably even noticed. And Jesus says, whoa, look at this. Check this out. Look what she just did. She gave more than all. Here's why. For they all put in out of their abundance, but she out of poverty has put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. So what does Jesus notice? She's giving everything. She's giving everything. Is God as concerned about the monetary value, the budget, as he is the heart and the sacrifice? So I think that that's important, because we get on numbers a lot. And I've heard of churches saying, this is our budget. We need to get to this amount, and everybody's kind of giving with that budget in mind. And I'm not knocking that. But really what the Lord is looking at is the Lord loves a what? What does he love when it comes? A cheerful giver. Here's someone that gave all that she had. She gave her last meal away because she wanted to contribute to the Lord's cause. And Jesus says, that's something special there. Sure, these others gave, $6,000. But she gave everything. And so when you think about what will the Lord notice about my contribution, what he's looking for is a cheerful heart. And I'm not saying that he is requiring or even wants you to give everything that you have in that sense. But he wants you to have that spirit. He wants you to have that type of heart. That's what he notices. That's what he's looking for. Thoughts and comments?
She trusted she would be taken
I suspect so. Yeah, I suspect that you would have to have that kind of faith to say, you know, I don't know where I'm going to get my next meal, but I feel like this is what I need to do in giving this to the Lord. And I suspect that God did take care of her.
Did the same to the apostles.
That's right. The apostles had to do the same thing. Very good. Any other thoughts? Got anything you want to add on that? All right, let's turn back over to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. You want to take verses 1 and 2?
Yeah. Then Jesus went out of and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." So the temple was the pride of the Jews, you might say, and they were leaving the temple, and one of these disciples, I think Mark says one of his disciples in Mark 13 and verse 1, said to him, look at this temple. Look at the great stones in it, and what kind of buildings there are here. He was admiring the architecture, you might say, of this building. And Jesus says something that I know shocked them. When they heard this, he said, "Not one stone will be left upon another." And don't you know that was a shocker? They were so proud of this structure, and don't you know that they thought that this will never, be torn down or thrown down like Jesus was predicting here. But what would you like to say about that? That's all I have.
Yeah, well, a couple of things about the temple. Massive structure on about a 40-acre complex, huge. And Herod had been working on it for about 40 years. And Herod wanted it to be the centerpiece, one of the wonders of the ancient world. And he had architects come and design it and craftsmen. And he was so meticulous about it that all of the stones of the temple had a decorative bevel around the edge of it, which was pretty time consuming and very costly. But he did that because he wanted some extra flair to it. And so you can know whether it was a Herodian built structure or not if they have these beveled stones in it. Huge stones. Some of these stones weighed like 20 tons, and gigantic stones. It had been in construction for about 40 years at this point by Jesus's life. At this point in Jesus's life. And it wasn't quite complete yet. It was almost complete. They were just putting the finishes touches on it when Jesus would say that. And now Jesus is talking about it's going to be gone. They're looking at it saying, no way, this thing's going to stand forever. For a few reasons. First of all, it's so beautiful, nobody would ever want to tear it down. And second of all, what is it? God's house. God wouldn't allow anything to happen to it. So for Jesus to make this kind of statement seems ridiculous. This is a model of the temple. And this is on the south side, which is where the Jews would commonly enter and exit the temple. There was a staircase that went through those doors that would go up onto the top of the platform where the temple complex was. And so as they're leaving and coming out, they're seeing all of these massive stones right here. And like I said, some of those were, 20-ton stones that were stacked and so precisely hewn that still today in some of the retaining wall, obviously none of the temple stands, but the retaining wall on the western wall, some of those stones you can't slide a dollar bill between because they were honed so perfectly. So the craftsmanship that was involved in it. And so you can just imagine them maybe walking down these steps, coming out and saying, wow, look at this. Can you believe this? And Jesus just takes it. Now think about what's on Jesus's mind. From the time that he topped Mount Olives on Sunday, coming down, and he sees Jerusalem, he's been weeping over it. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. He keeps seeing their destruction because he knows what's coming. And now as they exit out, they go, look at this fantastic temple. Isn't this beautiful? And Jesus knows that in 35 years, it'll be gone. 35 years. It'll be finished. Everybody will be so happy about it. and then within just a few years, it'll be torn down, completely destroyed. Nobody could see that coming. And so they are shocked by this. And so as they exit, they leave the temple complex and they go across the Kidron Valley, and they come up on the Mount of Olives. And in the background, if you stand on the Mount of Olives and look west, the whole hillside across the valley is filled up with the temple complex. And so they would be staying there on the Mount of Olives, looking across, seeing that temple complex, and they've got some questions about what Jesus said because that didn't make any sense to them. And so they said, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? How you understand those questions is probably going to determine how you read the rest of Matthew chapter 24. Whether you understand them to be asking about one issue or maybe a couple of different topics. And it's tough to gauge that. And in their mind, they might not have been sure on this. First of all, that's just a mind-blowing statement that the temple is going to be destroyed. So in their mind, they may think, well, the only time the temple would be destroyed is when the Lord comes in judgment against the whole world and takes us to be with God. And so when is that going to be? Maybe that's what they're saying. Maybe they are dividing it up into two different events. One is, when is the temple going to be destroyed? And then, when are you going to return in your final judgment? I personally believe that the way Jesus answers that is to at least answer it in two parts. To answer part one, when the temple is going to be destroyed, and part two, when the final judgment is going to come. And so in Matthew, I think that comes out a little bit more clearly than it does in Luke's account. But anyway, so they're confused on this. They want answers to when these things are going to be. So that is the setting for this next discussion, which is loved by so many, because so many look at Matthew chapter 24 and they take it to say, this is how we can know when Jesus is going to return. And they give all of these details from this. But it's really important to know the context that this discussion takes place in, because if you know the context, what's on the apostles' mind, what's on Jesus's mind, then it becomes clear what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah, they misapply this passage here, this section in 24. They think that these signs are going to be the signs for us that the end of the world is coming. But like you said, you got to keep it in context. It applies to Jerusalem here.
That's right.
The destruction of Jerusalem.
Any thoughts?
You said the dwelling place of God, and he wouldn't want to. They thought he would probably get the line that happened. That's a question. They want to know when.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Timmy was saying, why would God allow his house to be destroyed? And
Well, it was prophesied it would be. So it's
That's
fulfillment of prophecy.
yes, that's right.
As a matter of fact, I read where those Romans that came in to destroy Jerusalem, that one of the rulers wanted to save the temple, but they were so caught up in destruction that there was no way they could stop it. Mm-hmm. But like I just said, prophecy says it will be destroyed, so it had to be fulfilled. It had to be destroyed.
Yes, sir.
Think that there's any possibility that this situation Jesus is seeing his disciples and knowing the work that's set before them is really, really close, and yet the object of their eye is this temple. They're enamored with that, and yet they're in the presence of God.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, at this moment, they're missing.
Yes. That's a good point.
It's on the object and not the real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Very good.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is dwelling place is going to be.
Yeah. And the answer, I think, to your question is, why would God allow this to happen to his house? Because it wasn't his house anymore. He's leaving it. He's leaving it. And he left it. We have that picture in Ezekiel of his presence leaving the temple. And that's what's happening. And the reason he's leaving is because they're kicking him out, in a sense. They don't want him. And
he was rejecting these Jews as his covenant people.
that's right. All right, let's look at Jesus' answer. Verse 4. Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So I hear people all the time quote this verse and talk about, oh, you know, it's the last days. We're getting close. We're getting close because look at all the wars and the rumors of wars that are all around. And I always want to turn to this passage and say, okay, but this passage says that when you hear that, what? It's not yet. It's not yet. This is a sign that we're not there yet. And so it's just interesting how easy it is to lift some verbiage out of a verse without thinking at all about what the verse is actually saying. And so, see that you're not troubled. These things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my sake. Then many of you will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will arise and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So there's a lot that's going to take place here before the destruction of Jerusalem. So what are some of the things that are mentioned here that are going to take place before the destruction of Jerusalem? Wars. And rumors of wars. In other words, just troubled times. Everybody, there's a bunch of there's a bunch of threats and things that are taking place. And everybody's always nervous about what's going to happen. What would you say? Famine is going to take place. Pestilence, earthquakes, troubled times. There's going to be a lot of troubled times in a lot of ways. What else? Yeah, they're betraying one another. The love of men grows cold towards each other, mistreating each other. What else? False prophets. What else? People offending other people. Lawlessness will abound. One more thing there. The gospel. The gospel will go where? All the world. The gospel will go into all the world. Okay. So looking at that, I understand why people would say, "Woo, that sounds like what we see today. What Jesus said sounds like what we see today." And doesn't it? I mean, you look at the news and you think, "Woo, that sounds pretty similar, pretty similar." Here's what I think Jesus is talking about. Jesus is telling these disciples, these apostles, what they're going to see in their lifetime. Because the destruction of Jerusalem is going to come in their lifetime. Now, here's the one that trips people up. This one about the gospel going into all the world. Did the gospel go into all the world during the life of the apostles? Colossians 1:23. He says the gospel has gone into the whole world. So whatever this means, Paul uses the same language to say, by the time in Colossians, which was written in what, 50, 52, something like that? I don't know the exact date, but it's going to be somewhere around in there. It's going to be before the destruction of Jerusalem that Paul writes the book of Colossians, and he uses the same language to say, yeah, the gospel's already gone into all the world. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that there were any wars or rumors of wars in that time? Do you think there were any famines? Pestilence? By the way, we do have historical records of a lot of the things that were going on. And you know there were some famines. How do you know there were some famines? That's right. Agabus stood up and said there was going to be a famine in all the world, and they sent relief to the brethren in Judea. And so we know that Judea was affected by a famine during this period of time. Were there any persecutions of Christians during this time? Yeah. Exactly. That's the reason why the gospel went into all the world. So what Jesus is saying, they're saying, well, when's the temple going to be destroyed? And he said, well, let me tell you what you're going to be preoccupied doing before the temple is destroyed. You're going to be mistreated by a lot of people, going and preaching the gospel in different places and during very troubled times. But the end is not yet, but it's getting closer. So you're going to see all of that before it happens. And letting them know that. And so when you lay it out with the rest of the record that we have, and like in the book of Luke, what you see is, oh yeah, Jesus is just showing them exactly what they're going to experience over the next 30 years or so before the temple is destroyed. Any thoughts in this section?
In Mark's account, it says in 13:10, it says the gospel must first be preached to all men.
Mm-hmm.
Little more precise.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Anything else there? All right. Let's see. We can get a little bit further. You got anything you want to add through verse 14? We'll go a little bit further here in this. Verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let him who is in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. Woe to those who are pregnant and those nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there would be great tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. Unless those days should be shortened, no flesh would survive or be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. All right, stop right there and think about what Jesus is talking about here. So when are these things going to take place? When are these stones going to be thrown down and not one left upon another? Well, it won't be for a while because all of these other things are going to have to happen first. But there'll come a time where you will see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Now, what do we need to know here in order to clue in on what Jesus is saying? We need to know what Daniel was talking about when he talked about the abomination of desolation. Who feels like they've got a good understanding of that? Yes. Yes. Not that. No. Okay. But I thought you were talking about yes. So you're talking about in chapter 2 there, that image with the head of gold and yes. Okay. That may play into it indirectly because it does kind of fit in with what Daniel was talking about, but that's not exactly what I was thinking about. In the latter part of Daniel, where the Lord is showing him what's going to happen to Jews after Daniel's gone, he looks and he begins to be shown the details of what would take place during the Grecian Empire. And it talks about one who would come and stand in the holy place and desecrate the holy place. Now, it's been a while since we've studied this, but the abomination of desolation was when the Gentiles, particularly I think Antiochus Epiphanes, would come and offer a swine, a pig on the altar to desecrate that so that the Jews would not worship anymore. And so the abomination of desolation, according to Daniel, was when the Gentiles come in to the holy city and defile the holy city. So Jesus borrows that language. And he says, when you see that, when you see the Gentiles coming to defile this holy place, what do you need to do? You need to get out of here. You need to get out of here. How quickly? Right away. Like you don't have time to dilly-dally around. You got to get out of here. And so he gives this type of warning as we go through here. I'd like to read down further, but I don't know if we have time. You got something you would like to say? Yeah, let's go down a little bit further and I'll see if I can make the points in the time that we have. Verse 23, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe him. For false Christ and false prophets will arise to show great signs and wonders so as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. Therefore, If they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Look, he's in the inner room, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. What's the image that you see from that last statement?
When they see the ship sinking, that's where everything going down, that's when people are gonna come in to try to mislead them.
Yeah. All right. Very good. That last statement, wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Vultures, yeah, that birds of prey. That's exactly right. All right, or scavengers. So you know what? If I'm in my house and I look out over my sheep field and I see a bunch of buzzards circling around and landing on the ground, you know what I think is probably out there? I've probably got a dead sheep out there. I'm pretty sure of that. That's a sign. That's a clue that something's dead there. And what Jesus is saying is, you're going to see something that shows that something's dead here. And it's going to be when the vultures surround it. And some have put eagles, because I've heard this described before. The Roman insignia was an eagle. And so the picture, and it is a very vivid picture, if that's exactly what Jesus had in mind, is if you're in Jerusalem and when the Roman armies come to besiege Jerusalem, what you're going to look out and see is you're going to see a bunch of insignias of the eagle surrounding. And he said, you're the carcass. You're the dead carcass that they're coming to consume. Now, when you see that, you better get out. Well, now, it would seem that it's already too late. And that's right, in one sense it is. But do you know what happened? The Romans came to besiege Jerusalem. They encircled it, they besieged it. I don't remember the time. I didn't bring my notes on the time. And then there was another conflict over, and they withdrew and went to the other conflict. Do you know what the Jews said when they withdrew? Yay! God is saving us. Do you know what the Christians did? Let's get out of here right now. And that's what they did. And we have historians that talk about the fact that the Christians used that as an opportunity. When they saw the Romans start to draw back, they got out of town in a hurry. And so when Jesus talks about when you see the abomination of desolation, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is out in the field to go back. In other words, you don't have time to say, well, we probably got a month or so. Well, no, get out now. And they did so. And that historian said that not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem, so which is very interesting. And what they based it upon was what Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 24. They took that to be their cue, their sign to get out of there. And so they escaped and fled from there. Now, if this is talking about the end of the world, first of all, I don't know why it specifies those in Judea. But let me ask you this. Do you think you're going to save yourself by fleeing to Sipsey Wilderness area? No. That's not going to be beneficial for us. And so he's not talking about the end of the world. He's not trying to give signs so that Christians can predict when the Lord is going to return. He's giving signs so that Christians in Jerusalem could escape and leave. And so he gives things that they would be able to recognize and utilize in a plan to get out of there. Any thoughts? Comments?
In verse 20, why were they supposed to pray that it wouldn't happen on the Sabbath if you're talking to Christians?
Yeah, so I think probably, so you're still in a Jewish culture. And I don't know the answer for this for sure. But I do know if you go to Israel right now and an emergency happens on the Sabbath, that's a really bad day for it to happen because everything is shut down. You're not able to, you're not able to get any supplies. And I know at certain times they lock the gates to the city on the Sabbath so that nobody would be bringing trade in and out. So I don't know if that's what's under consideration, but I think he's saying the winter would be really bad because you would be hindered by things. The Sabbath would be really bad because everything is in a state of being shut down and so forth. So you just wouldn't want this. You wouldn't want to have to do this on times where it would be really difficult to do so. Yeah. 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 They did that during Nehemiah's day. For sure.
What does verse 21 mean?
There will be great tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the world. So that phrase, not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no forever. I don't know that literally means this is more significant than anything that's ever happened, because it's used several times throughout the scripture, such as never been before, that type of language. So it just seems to be a superlative to talk about incredibly difficult things. And when the Romans besieged, it was incredibly difficult hardship during that time. And for God's people, or for Israel, let me say, it probably was the worst thing they had ever experienced. All right, we'll pick up in verse 29 next time. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact